kind of set up really quick. Cute. Okay, so I'm Zavier Wingham. As mentioned, I am in the Middle East and Islamic Studies, as well as the History Department. I'm also trained in the study of the African diaspora. Sorry, just a quick moment. Can anyone else hear the binging that's happening in the background? Okay. So yeah, I'm working on my PhD at New York University. As you may know already, it's all on the enslaved and manumitted Africans in the Ottoman Empire, particularly in the 19th century. I'll talk a little bit about that today. Of course, in a pre-corona kind of timeline, I would have already been in Istanbul, and we probably would have been able to have this conversation in person. It's my hope that next year, currently I'm in Berlin. It's my hope that next year I'll be able to travel and spend a couple of months both quarantining and doing a little bit of research as well in Turkey. So I'm going to get started with a presentation. I know everyone must love PowerPoints. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so before I begin, I want to just note that the African diaspora's history doesn't begin and end with slavery, that it's just a piece of the puzzle and happens to be the focus of my research. One of the ways that we can begin to think about the relationship between race, slavery, and Blackness in the Ottoman Empire is to think of the empire's relationship with Africa, which extends as far back as the Ottoman conquest of Egypt in 1517 and arguably even earlier. Over the centuries, parts of the empire of the continent were incorporated into the empire. So coupled with the preexistence of the slave trade in the region, Islam's conventions against enslaving those of the faith, the proximity of the empire to Africa, or the proximity to the empire, Africa and its people essentially became a casualty of geography and a source for labor. Ottomans often labeled Africans as Arab, meaning Arab, or Zengi, which is a more nebulous term that has various connotations, much of which we can get into. There are a couple of pieces. I mean, we have a wonderful panel that can talk about this as well, but there are quite a few academic articles that I can recommend on this topic too. So yeah, they labeled people Arab or Zengi while acknowledging differences between them and Abyssinians, which they called Habeshi. Conversely, Ottomans were more informed of the origins of enslaved quote unquote white people, noting details such as which particular branch the Circassian tribe one belonged to. In the period that my research focuses on, the 19th century, there was a revival in the Black slave trade. As a result of the Egyptian occupation of Sudan in 1820 and the Ottoman reoccupation of Tripoli in 1835, enslaved Africans were increasingly present in the Ottoman slave markets. So according to Ehud Toledano, it's assumed that some 16 to 18,000 persons were trafficked from Africa into the empire each year. There were three major networks that are typically associated with the trafficking of Africans: the North African flow, the Red Sea flow, and the Gulf Iraq flow. These more or less map onto Egypt, present-day Libya, the Red Sea, Arabia, and the Persian Gulf. So you can see here, there's a main Mediterranean route. Tripoli is one of the places that my research kind of engages in. And I'm more concerned with the larger Black Mediterranean as well, or the larger Mediterranean as I see it. You also have the Red Sea traffic, and you can kind of see places here. I'll pause just a bit so people can kind of take in all of these arrows. And then you also have Persian Gulf Iraq traffic. And this is part of the Indian Ocean. And there are quite a few talks that we can plug and stuff like that in terms of like how this connects to Iran, the kind of research that's going on there. There was a wonderful talk that happened about the African diaspora in Iran a couple of weeks ago as well. So yeah. Enslaved Africans in the Ottoman Empire, primarily women and girls, continued to labor as domestic servants, and to a lesser extent, men in agricultural production. Also, Africans in the Ottoman served in the Ottoman palace as eunuchs. For those interested in this area, historian Jane Hathaway's research offers a rich and complex history of African eunuchs in the Ottoman Empire. So this is a picture of one of the Ottoman eunuchs photographed by Pascal Sebag in 1870s. And there's like one of the reasons why I'm in Berlin is that the Staatsbibliothek zu Berlin has a collection of basically Turkish like biographies that I've yet to actually get my hands on, mostly because of Corona, but hopefully things will change in the coming months. Okay. So the 19th century is particularly important as many subjects of the Sultan and Ottoman elites in particular began to debate ideas of security, life, honor, property, and equality in the late 1830s. Thereafter, a series of reforms were introduced from the 1830s to the 1880s, known as the Tanzimat era. And this basically just means reform. These programs variably aimed, among many things, to centralize the Ottoman government, increase economic efficiency, and improve its armies. This period is also significant for a number of reasons to the history of the African diaspora in the Ottoman Empire. As you see on your screen, there are three kind of major moments that happen within this same period. During this moment, Ottoman elites had to contend with British and French abolitionist efforts as early as the 1840s, resulting in the prohibition of trafficking enslaved Africans, decreed by the Sultan Abdul Majid in 1857. It had varying levels of effect in slowing the slave trade, and you can look towards texts by Hakan Erdem on this actually. And then in 1880, the Anglo-Ottoman Convention for the Suppression of the Black Slave Trade was another consequential piece of legislation in Western European and Ottoman efforts. It manumitted Africans in the empire and offered the British mutual rights of search and seizure in the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, and parts of East Africa, but not the Mediterranean. The convention also required the Ottoman government to establish guest houses, or misafirhane, throughout the empire for recently manumitted Africans. They were temporary shelters until they could be transported to the main guest house in Izmir. The Izmir institution trained African men in vocational, artisanal, and military crafts, and African women as salaried domestic servants. The Ottoman government also devised a plan to marry and settle the agricultural hinterlands of Izmir with Africans as they labored on the land under seemingly different conditions. Today, there's a vibrant community of Afro-Turks predominantly in the Izmir province, and they've received extensive coverage from media organizations such as Deutsche Welle, TRT World, and several documentaries that are available on YouTube. So I'm just gonna show a couple of those. So you have one here, Again Afro-Turkleri, which you can all find on YouTube. This is another one that Deutsche Welle did, Afro-Turks and the Legacy of the Ottoman Empire Slave Trade. It's available both in English and Turkish. Egenin renkli simaları Afro-Turkler. And this is a documentary that you can also find on YouTube that is pretty good as well. Siyahum Afrikaliyum Turkum. Okay. I think I can stop here for now for a little bit, Taz. This is, I guess, the kind of setting the scene for the historical context. Oh, I can't hear you.
Oh, presentation. Can you maybe, is there a way we can make those available
After
to those
who are attending? After the talk, I'll collect everything that I'm presenting and send it to you all. Is that possible? Okay. Or actually, I can do it. I'll do it during the panel discussion.
Great. If you can share links in the chat maybe, or we can make sure that we post it in the group, in the Facebook group for the event
For sure.
also. Okay, so basically you answered the first question that we'd had for you, but we're going to move into the second question, which was basically based on this research, some of what you went into, as well as your experience with Turkey in general. How do you connect the Black Lives Matter movement with the current situation in Turkey? And where do you think this conversation needs to be heading?
That's a really good question, and thank you. So like my own self, I like always have a positionality statement at the beginning, because I think it's important for people to realize that I'm not Turkish. Like I don't pretend to be Turkish. Like quite a many other people have been pretending to be Black or this, that, and the other recently, as some might have seen. So I think it's important to emphasize that I'm not Afro-Turk, so I can't really tell you where the conversation needs to head. I can recommend looking towards the Afro-Turk associations and the communities and the African diaspora in Turkey. Here, I want to stress that it's important to think both about Afro-Turk communities and the African diaspora in Turkey. This means contemporary African migrants that reside in Turkey, because they're also relevant to the story, they're a part of it. There are many Ottoman legacies of enslavement that continue to mark the African diaspora in Turkey. Some you may already be familiar with, such as Arabaca, a figure that could be likened to the racial caricature of African American women known as the mammy, or the mammy figure. There are a number of racist stereotypes as well that I could name, such as the association of Black people with selling watches. So before we kind of get into that, I want to show you a couple of images. So like this is a candy that I've seen somewhere on Istiklal Caddesi, that caught my eye, and I just found another picture of it. It's being associated with milk chocolate, talking about your skin, saying, your skin is so, very much so like chocolate, or saying like "Çikolata rengi" or whatever. You see these kinds of knickknacks everywhere, and they're just kind of like what's the word? Ubiquitous kind of symbolic figures of slavery that kind of seem to have no context. But in fact, we might be familiar with figures such as this, the Arabaca character, or as recently from a commercial at Benham, where there's a figure that essentially he's in blackface and pretending to be the Arabaca, or portraying the Arabaca. So as I was saying, there's even situations, and this is why I think it's important to think about African diaspora beyond Afro-Turks, or more so to include the African diaspora when we talk about Afro-Turk communities, because there was a situation that happened a couple of years back, which some people here might be familiar with, that happened in Bolu, where a Turkish person asked a Nigerian, Saad Kaç elbiseyi nereden aldın? And on its face, it might seem that these are kind of like isolated events, and that it doesn't mean much. But there's a typical association that when you are Black and you are from the African continent in particular, that you're associated with some kind of trade in selling watches or selling clothes. And these kinds of provocations or these kinds of questions don't necessarily come come at other people that would walk across the scene. For instance, you wouldn't say that this is something that happens to a Turkish person, where they just they ask another Turkish person, what time is it? Where did you get your clothes? And so the way I see it is that these events might seem isolated, but they aren't. They're part of a wider discourse of how Blackness, Africans, and the African diaspora are understood in Turkey. So to turn back to your question about Black Lives Matters, many might think that BLM is only or primarily concerned about police brutality, and that's a very important element. There's also much to be said about depictions, portrayals, and representations of the African diaspora. And here we might begin to consider how and why BLM matters to Turkey and its African diaspora. And to move even beyond that, I'd say we have to remember that this is not the first time that BLM and Turkey have been placed in the same conversation with one another. I remember on Tumblr, Turk sharing tips and tricks on combating tear gas, offering learned experience from the Gezi Park protests. In fact, during the Ferguson uprisings, Beşiktaş fans held up signs during the Arsenal game in support of Black Lives Matters. So it's important to remember that we're not having this conversation in a vacuum. Can I get in there?
Thank you so much, Zavier. Thanks for the presentation and for answering this question. We have a few questions from attendees as well, if you're prepared to take some from our audience. I'm going to start with the first one. Somebody is asking, I'd like to ask generally, what originally got Zavier interested in learning about this part of the diaspora? Zavier, if you wouldn't mind answering that.
Sure. So I don't know, it's kind of a amazing story. You kind of, I guess you find yourself in Turkey at some point. In my case, I found my way to Turkey. I think it requires me to explain how I found myself to Turkey. So I originally started studying Farsi in undergrad. And back then I couldn't go to Iran. And so I figured I would learn another language to a place that I could go, which was close by, and it was Turkey. So I learned Turkish in 2000. I started learning in 2011, 12 maybe. And then I actually was there during the Gezi Park protest. That was the first time that I came to Turkey. And ever since then, I've been finding more ways that there are elements about Turkey's history in particular that I find interesting. And during 2015, 2014, 2015, this is a moment where Black Lives Matters, and maybe this kind of meta, that Black Lives Matters was a moment that was happening in the US, and I found myself living in Turkey for a year and a half, very much so thinking about what Blackness is to the Middle East, what it means to be Black moving through Turkey. At that time, I had lived in Istanbul for a bit. I was in Ankara for 3 months, and it's a very kind of different geographic space to be Black in Istanbul versus Black in Ankara. And then if you're traveling to different places, like I traveled a lot to like Amasra. I think that was maybe the furthest I went is Amasra. So like if you're going through places and you're traveling as the only Black person, you kind of tend to think about these things and you're thinking about the diaspora, at least in my case. And so historically, I was interested in the African diaspora in Turkey in two ways. At first, it was a contemporary question of oral history and how that was being communicated. And then second, I wanted to move this project further back to then think about what the how the Ottoman Empire and Ottoman elites in particular, but also enslaved and manumitted Africans were navigating these new kind of racial discourses, or particular discourses around Blackness during the 19th century, where we have the survival and Black slave trade, where at least what I'm beginning to see, a closer association between enslavement or servitude, in fact, and Blackness.
Thank you, Zavier. We have another question from, two more questions. And I think about 6 more minutes of time. From Merve Noor, as a law student who is interested in diaspora culture and African studies, when I learned there are Afro-Turks in Turkey, I also somehow came to know a tradition of Ottoman pilgrims. As I remember, Ottoman pilgrims used to have African slaves from Mecca and Medina and bring them to Anatolia and then free them. According to you, Zavier, do you know if there's any veracity to this story at all?
It very much so well could be true. I mean, there's several things that I've encountered. I mean, so to take a small step back, the fact that enslaved Africans were manumitted or they were freed is not actually it's not a surprising element to me. More so because it was something that was it generally happened. Manumission was seen as a kind of beneficial thing for the enslaver or the master or the person, essentially the Ottoman Turk, because we're talking more or less about not the common everyday person, but more so elites, people that had money. Um, and so it was looked at as a good thing. It wasn't that we can think about enslavement in the same register or the same time length as slavery elsewhere. But to that matter of this, to this particular case, it reminded me there was a moment that I was doing some research and I discovered that enslaved people were used as travelers' checks on the way to Mecca, kind of like as a, I don't know, down payment. I wanted to look into this more, but you kind of like, it's like chasing, I don't know, something in the dark. You're just kind of like, I chased this tail, it hit a dead end, and then you find something else. So yeah, it's more than likely that that was the case.
Okay, and I think we have about 10 more minutes now. I was wrong. We have another question. This one, I'm not sure who it's from, but the question is, where was the Istanbul slave market? Do you know in particular which neighborhood or portion of the city it might have been?
I should know this off the top of my head, but I do not remember. I know whose work we could look towards. Michael Ferguson has written about this in terms of where I feel like it was. I'm not gonna, I don't want to be quoted wrong on this. Unfortunately, I do not have it on the top of my brain where the Istanbul slave market is, but we have some smart people in the room that also might know exactly where it is.
Yeah, if anybody wants to chime in, you can ping Tahia in the chat. Then we'll go to the next question, which is from Bahar. Can we trace African diaspora through the Tanzimat novels? If so, how? Thank you.
Yes, this is actually one of the things that I am working on. Give me 2 seconds. I want to pull up this list for you. So you might be familiar with I almost had it. There we go. Okay, there are actually quite a few people that you should, if you don't already know, you should probably get ready to write these down. But Ahmed Mithat is one of the first people that comes to mind. He has this novel called Esaret, which is available at Atatürk Kitaplı if you're interested in it. There's actually like quite a few of his texts. So like Firkat is one, Allah'ın emri, Faik Bey ile Nuriddil Hanım'ın güzeşti. The list kind of goes on. There's a Ricaizade, Mahmut Erkem, Abdulhak Hamid Tarhan, Namık Kemal has some, such as Intibah Karabela, Abdul Halim Mimduh, Mimduz Bedriye, Sami Paşazade Serzai has 3 actually. Sergüzeş Dün ve Mihriban. And the kind of list can go on, but I'll give you the larger frame of people that you should look to in terms of like Turkish scholars. So you can look at Ismail Parlatur's work, who has a fantastic book on this. You can also, if you're interested in Turkish folklore, you could look to, what is his name? His name is Pertev Naili Boratov. And he has like a kind of like fantastic article, and as well as a couple of other things that touch on this. But it's absolutely possible to do this kind of tracing of slavery in particular. Now the question of African diaspora and the question of these novels is something that I've yet to solve. Where I think you might find a lot more go out of this is actually by looking at shadow plays or Hacivat Vikaragos. That this is kind of where a lot of this is coming from. So like didn't get to talk about this too much, but Adebayo is such a fascinating figure to me because she comes out of this like literary tradition and then comes onto our screen and television through an Afro-Turk actually, Dursuna Shirin. And because of her, she's portrayed like, I don't know, she has like 60 films or something like that. And I'm trying to get my hands on all of them, but haven't been successful yet. And she has like 60 films that she does, and then eventually this role is taken over by a man. A lot of cultural production and tracing that can actually be done there.
That's super fascinating about the Kyrgyz there.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, I'm gonna move into our next question, and I think we have 5 more minutes. Yeah, let's see. This is from Racine. How do you account for the current issues of the treatment of the diaspora and Afro-Turks with the larger disconnect in Turkish collective memory in terms of the history of slavery / hypersexualization, which seems to carry over into today? Thanks.
Could you repeat the question?
Yeah, it's a big one. So how do you account for the current issues of the treatment of the diaspora and Afro-Turks with the larger disconnect in Turkish collective memory in terms of the history of slavery / hypersexualization, which seems to carry over into today?
One of the ways, this is a really tricky question. Part of it being the fact that I'm not Turkish. So like, I can't really tell you, I mean, I have guesses, don't get me wrong. I can't really tell you that from a personal experience that this is exactly the reason why. But my theory or kind of like initial, like, I don't know, argument about it is that the way in which the history of the Turkish nation is instructed. So if anyone's familiar with the Torbali tezi, you know that there's a particular way in which the history of Turks as people and Turks as a nation, and that history itself is told and recounted. And often the idea of Turkishness is at the forefront of this, and that Turkishness does not necessarily include or preclude, and in fact probably occludes Blackness in particular ways. And this is the kind of like historiography that a lot of people come across in the sense that, or not historiography, it's a not necessarily a silence insofar as it's a manufactured one. And what I mean by that is that there's not necessarily an engagement with what slavery looked like. And it's kind of assumed that there's no association between Turkey and Africa. When if you look towards various things, like in the past, one of the projects that I wanted to focus on was the relationship between Turkey and Libya, which you might see as kind of like a modern relationship if you're thinking about contract workers or guest workers. But in fact, that relationship extends back to the Ottoman Empire indeed. And so it's kind of thinking about these continuities between the two. So to hit on the last part, which is about the kind of gendered element of it. And this is like also one of the parts that I'm really, really excited about, because thinking about the ways in which African women were gendered and ungendered in particular ways is really fascinating. Hortense Spillers has an amazing article on this in terms of the African-American woman, or at least in the transatlantic experience of this. But I think a lot of this in the contemporary moment, we have to remind ourselves that Blackness travels in particular ways, and that the way in which media is consumed, and this is maybe also touching on the reason why we need to think in an international perspective and a global perspective when it comes to BLM, because those same kinds of caricatures and those same kind of portrayals that happen in the US, they get exported elsewhere.
Thank you so much, Xavier. I had another question queued up that I was looking forward to asking, but we're out of time and we're going to have to move on to Ayşe. And I think Ayşe will maybe be able to provide some more perspective on some of the questions that you guys had for Xavier. Yeah, so Xavier, again, thank you. And
thank you. And I got a tip from Erchin that the Istanbul market was actually in it was near Kapılı Çarşı, which is what I wanted to say, but I was like, oh, but thankfully we have friends in the room.
Thank you guys for answering that. Okay. Next, we're gonna be hearing from Ayşe. Ayşe will introduce herself and Bahar will do any translating if for Ayşe. Ayşe, are you here? I don't see you. But... Hi.
Hello. Yes, I'm here.
Hi, Ayşe. If you want to introduce yourself to everybody.
Yes, hello, everybody. I'm so sorry. Okay. Hi. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi.
I hear you, Ayşe.
Yes, I'm here.
Okay. Sorry, I was having some technical difficulties.
Yes, hello, everybody again.
All right, Ayşe, I'm gonna.
Did you hear me? Hello?
I can hear you now. Yeah, thank you. I can hear you.
Yes, I'm so sorry. I will continue in Turkish, unfortunately.
No, it's fine.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So, we first just want to know a little bit about your own connection to your identity as an Afro-Turk, if you want to go into that.
Yes, please, in Turkish again.
Evet, merhaba Ayşe tekrardan. Biz şimdi ilk olarak senin Afro-Türk olarak Afro-Türk kimliğinle olan ilişkini merak ediyoruz. Biraz bahseder misin? Bir de ikişer cümle gidelim, olur mu?
Tamam. Öncelikle İzmir doğumluyum. İzmir'in Torbali ilçesinde doğdum. 22 yaşıma kadar burada yaşadım. Bir Afro-Türk anne ve Afro-Türk babadan dünyaya geldim.
I was born and raised in Izmir's Torbali district, and I stayed here until I was 22, and I'm the child of both Afro-Turk mother and a father.
Mahallede çok fazla arkadaşlarımla renk farkından dolayı sorun yaşadığımı hatırlamıyorum. Ama diğer ilçelere ve diğer illere gidildiğinde bu biraz çocukların veya daha yetişkinlerin işte alaycı şeyleriyle karşılaşabiliyordum. Alaycı baskılarıyla karşılaşabiliyordum.
Yeah. I don't remember that I had any problems with my friends in the neighborhood that I was living. However, once I went out of this district, I might sometimes be having problems like mocking and jokings, things alike.
Bunlar genelde Arap yağlı çorap, yağmur yağıyor, seller akıyor, Arap kızı camdan bakıyor, gündüz feneri gibi tekerleme söylemlerle karşılaşıyordum.
I used to hear riddle-like discourses regarding my color with a particular rhyme, and those words are like daylight or rain. It rains and the Arab girl looks from the window. Those things.
Okula başladığımda ise kendimce beyaz kızların daha güzel olduğu algısı oluşmaya başlamıştı. Saçlarının düz olmasından kaynaklı.
And then I started finding white girls as very beautiful due to their straight hair.
Kafamda düz saçlı olanların veya sarı saçlı olanların veya yeşil gözlü olanların daha güzel olacağı algısı vardı.
A perception was in my head that suggests white skinned girls and girls who have straight hairs and green eyes and who are blonde were more beautiful.
Bu yüzden şeyler takardım, sallanmasını isterdim rüzgarda.
I used to hang hair accessories on my hair so it could blow in the wind.
Genelde özgüvenim yüksek bir çocuktum. Genellikle Türk olduğum vurgusuyla yetiştiğimi hatırlıyorum. Türk olduğum dışında başka bir Afrikalı olduğu vurgusu hiçbir zaman ailemde verilmemişti. Türk adetlerine göre büyütülmüştüm.
When I was a child, I was very confident and I was emphasizing on that I'm a Turk. And in my family, I haven't been raised as an African at all.
Ergenlik zamanımda ise bazı kişiler kendilerinden nefret ederler, kendilerini sevmezler. Ama ben de tam tersi kendi kimliğini arama, kendine dönme, kendini daha çok sevme, araştırma, siyahi ırka daha yakınlaşma gibi şeyler oluşmaya başlamıştı.
Normally in puberty years, some dislike themselves, some hate themselves, but on the contrary, I was confident and I like myself. I was searching for my identity. I find myself so many times that I'm trying to find my identity.
Genelde özgüveni yüksek biriydim. Hatta bu bir arkadaşımın ablası tarafından siyah olduğum için mi bilmiyorum ne kadar özgüvenin fazla diye de yadırganmıştı. Olmaması gerekirmiş gibi yani.
Oh, once one of my friend's elder sister asked me why you are that confident. Yes.
Bunun dışında okul hayatımda öğretmenler tarafından pozitif ayrımcılıkla da karşılaştım diyebilirim. İyi bir öğrenciydim ve tüm öğretmenlerim tarafından takdir edilen bir öğrenciydim. Bunu pozitif ayrımcılık olarak görebiliriz.
When I was in, I was exposed to positive discrimination. My teachers loved me so much and I was a good student, but today I think that it was a positive discrimination.
Üniversite hayatına geldiğimde ise bunların tam tersi olduğunu gördüm. İlim yuvası olarak kafamda düşündüğüm yer aslında kendini geliştirememiş birçok bireyin topluluğu gibiydi.
When was a college student, I encountered the opposite. For me, the college was a house of information, but turns out I think it was a full of uneducated people.
Öyle ki yemekhanede, yurtta kalırken odalarda şahsıma kötü küfürlü espriler, gülüşmeler, kırıcı ithamlarda bulunuyordu öğrenciler tabii.
Both in dormitory and in cafeteria, I was also exposed to bad language, very heartbreaking accusations, and again, racial discourses.
Hatta yurt odasında 4 kişilik odalarda kalınıyordu. Bir kız öğrenci benimle aynı odada kalmamayı istediğini söyledi. Yani kalmayı reddetti.
I was staying in a shared room at the dorm, and I remember that one of the students didn't want to share the same room with me.
Gerekçesi ise rengimden dolayı gece gördüğünde beni korkacağına kendini inandırmıştı ve yönetimi de buna ikna etmeye çalıştı.
So her excuse was that she might get afraid of me when she saw me during night, and further she tried to convince the administration of the dormitory.
Bununla birlikte sanıyorum bu soruyu tamamladığımı düşünüyorum.
So I think I complete the question.
Yes. We have one question before opening it up to the audience. First, Ayşe, thank you for sharing those experiences with us. Those must have been hard things to bring back to the surface and maybe even continue to see around you today. But we were wondering if you could tell us about just a little bit about your work with the Afro-Turk Foundation and the community that you found there.
So can you tell us a little bit about... Ben neden İngilizce konuşuyorum? Bize biraz şeyden bize biraz Afro-Turk community'den, yani oradaki Afro-Turk kurumundan ve orayla orandaki ilişkinden bahsedebilir misin?
Tabii. 2006 yılında ilk olarak Mustafa Oltak'la tanışmıştık. Ben de zaten genelde kafamda böyle bir organizasyon yapmak vardı. Bunu yapan bir kişiyle tanıştım. Bu da Mustafa Oltak. Bir dernek kuracağını söylemişti bana.
In 2016, I've met with Mustafa Olpak, who also wanted to found a foundation, and it was the idea we shared both. We both shared together.
Çok sevmiştim. Ve benim fikrime bir kişi şey yapmıştı, ortaya çıkartmıştı. Sonra ona yardım etmeye başladım 2006 yılında. 2006'dan bu yana da dernekle sıkı ilişkiler içerisindeyim.
Oh, sorry, it was 2006. So when I heard that Mustafa Olpak also wants to find a foundation, I was so happy, and since 2006 we are working together.
Kendisi 3 yıl önce vefat etti ama biz hala devam ettiriyoruz Dana Bayramı ile birlikte bu organizasyonları.
Unfortunately, he passed away 3 years ago, but we still keep organizing our events, such as Kalf Festival.
Zavier de biraz önce bahsetmişti zaten konuda. Onunla ilgili fotoğraflar göstermişti az önce. Dana bayramları genelde Afro-Türklerin yılda bir kez, ki bu Mayıs ayında oluyor genellikle, birlikte toplanıp sohbet ettiği, dans ettiği, özlem giderdiği bir organizasyon.
So the Kalf Fest was also mentioned by Zavier. It is a fest that we all, as Afro-Turks, we all get together once a year, and we dance freely, we talk, we catch up each other every year in May.
Bunun dışında dernekte bir takım işte Afro-Almanlarla bir organizasyon yapılıyor. Genelde küçük çocuklar, genç Afro-Türkler için işte Almanya'da buluşuluyor veya Afro-Almanlar Türkiye'ye gelip Afro gençlerle ilgili bir proje geliştiriyorlar.
We are also making organizations in collaboration with the Afro-Germans. Sometimes we go there and sometimes they come, and these events cover children and the teen groups.
Dışında dernekle ilgili çalışmalarımız bu şekilde.
Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Thank you for that. I'm now gonna start with the questions from the attendees. First, from Abdul, what explains the very low presence of Afro-Turks in almost all aspects of life in Turkey nowadays?
Can I get the question again?
Yeah, what explains the very low presence of Afro-Turks in almost all aspects of life in Turkey nowadays?
Afro-Türklerin hangi yönü bugün Afro-Türkleri tanımlar? Bunun gibi mi?
I think they mean why don't we see as many Afro-Turks in general when looking at life in Turkey in the day-to-day?
Mesela bugün Türkiye'ye baktığımızda neden Afro-Türkleri görüyoruz?
Neden Afro-Türkleri görüyoruz?
Neden görmüyoruz belki?
Neden görmüyoruz? Pardon. Neden görmüyoruz? Evet.
Neden görmüyorsunuz? Aslında 2006 yılına kadar son 5 yılda sosyal medyanın artmasıyla daha görünür hale geldi aslında Afro-Türkler. Ama 2006'ya kadar, ki bu biz derneği kurana kadar gerçekten görünmez haldelerdi. Çünkü Afro-Türkler genelde kırsal kesimde yaşayan, ekonomik gücü çok fazla olmayan, çok fazla okuyamayan ve tek amacı, gayesi akşama çocuğuna bir yemek götürebilme olan. Yani görünür olma seviyesi yoktu kesinlikle 2006'ya kadar. Ama 2006'dan sonra derneğin kurulmasından bu yana artık daha görünür halde ve birçok kişi Türkiye'de tanıyor artık Afro-Türkleri.
Well, Afro-Turks were not visible that much until 2006, thanks to social media. So it's more visible. And also thanks to Afro-Turk Foundation. Before that, Afro-Turks were not able to get education, and they tend to live in the rural areas, so they were more invisible. But yeah, thanks to Afro-Turk Foundation, now they are more visible.
Thank you. Thank you, Abdul, for the question also. From El Erjan, is there any way that we can know how many Afro-Turks there are in Turkey? Do we have any numbers or anything like that?
Sayı bilinmiyor açıkçası ama 1500 arası asimile olan Afro-Türklerle birlikte olduğu söyleniyor. Başta biz derneği kurarken yaklaşık 2 milyondan bahsediyordu Mustafa Olpak ama bu birazcık yüksek, abartılmış bir rakam. Daha sonraları bunun 1500 civarı olduğu noktasında birleştik.
Mm-hmm. So the exact number of Afro-Turks is unknown, but roughly speaking, it is 1,500 with the ones assimilated. But Mustafa Olpak guessed that it was around 2 million. But after that, we come to realize that it was 1,500, around 1,500.
Thank you. This question is from Jovan. Do you find that the newer generation of Afro-Turks are interested or proud of the African heritage, or do they prefer to be solely rooted in their Turkishness?
Çevirelim. Şöyle, yeni jenerasyon Afro-Türkler Afrikan mirasına böyle sahip mi çıkıyorlar? Yoksa daha çok böyle hani Türkleştiler mi? Yani daha çok böyle unuttular mı? Yani bayağı bir değiştirdim ama yani ana fikir bu.
Çok teşekkür ederim. Güzel bir soru. Bununla ilgili Mustafa Olpak'ın bir sözü var. Birinci kuşak yaşar, ikinci kuşak inkar eder, üçüncü kuşak araştırır. Çevirecek misin?
Evet. So there is a sentence, there is a saying of Mustafa Olpak. So the first generation denies, and the second generation lives, and the third generation neydi? Third generation? Duyamadım.
Araştırır.
And the third generation makes research.
Evet, bu anlamda ilk jenerasyon dediği yaşar. Yani o işte Afrika'dan getirilme, işte burada öyle veya bu şekilde yaşamaya zorunlu kılınma, onu yaşıyor ilk ilk jenerasyon. İkinci jenerasyon ki bunlar bizim anneannelerimiz, dedelerimiz veya annelerimiz, babalarımız. Onlar da tamamen kendilerini Türk gibi sayıyor ve aksini düşünmüyor asla. Yani tamamen Türk. Hatta o kadar Türkler ki siyah olduklarını unutup TV'de herhangi bir Afrika ile alakalı bir şey gördüklerinde onların haline acıyıp işte o öyle bir ırkla sanki biz iç içe değiliz. Yani o ırk biz o ırktan gelmemişiz. Farklı bir ırkmışız gibi davranıyorlar. Yani olaya yabancılaşma. Hani biz tamamen Türk'üz. Bu toplumun içindeyiz. Üçüncü jenerasyonda yani bizim jenerasyon veya bir sonraki jenerasyonda bunu artık araştırıyor. Hani siyah belli ki farklı. Yani ama ikinci kuşak dediği gibi tamamen bunu bizim siyah Türk olduğumuzu kanıksamış. Yani böyle düşünüyorlar.
Yes. So the first generation, as we said, denies. So this first generation actually experienced the past. Okay, these are these guys, and then the second generation who denies that those are the people like Ayşe Sezer's grandmother and grandfather. So those people denies very much, to the degree where whenever they saw something very unpleasant and upsetting about Africans, they don't even find any connection to themselves, with themselves. Like they just feel very sad about them. So Ayşe says they are that much Turkified. So the third generation actually comes to a realization that a Black person can't be a Turk. So let's search about this. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you. Oh, we're done with the question, I think. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next question, which is from Jessica. What are your hopes for Afro-Turks today?
What are your hopes? Ayşe'cim, bugün Afro-Türkler için neler umuyorsun?
Görünür olmayı, daha fazla görünür olmayı. Yani yolda yürürken mutlaka biz 10 kişiden 8'i tarafından dönülüp tekrar bakılan bir ırkız Afro-Türk olarak da, ve bu tüm farklı bireyler için geçerli. İşte engelli bireyler için de veya işte görüntüsü farklı olan bireyler için de, çok çok uzun boylu veya çok çok kısa boylu bireyler için de, ama Afro-Türk olarak bu toplumun içinde var olmayı umut ediyoruz. Yani varız zaten. Bunu birçok toplumun çoğu, en azından %90'ı tarafından kabul edilmeyi bekliyoruz. Yani dediğim gibi bu son 4-5 yıldır daha görünür, ama tabii daha alacak çok yolumuz var diye düşünüyorum.
Okay. So Ayşe hopes that Afro-Turks will be more visible in the future because they are the one who, while walking, gets attention, gets all the looks, let's say 8 looks out of 10. But also she says that it's not because we are Afro-Turks, but because there are other people also gets looks, like disabled people, very tall people, short people, and so forth. So Ayşe hopes that in the future, like 4 or 5 years later, these looks will be gone and Afro-Turks will be more visible.
Thank you. So Bahar and Ayşe, Bahar, we have a question from Enes, who wrote the question out in Turkish and also has it here in English. If we sent it to you in the Zoom chat in Turkish, if you want to read it for us, and I'll read it in English now for everyone else. At the end of the day, do you see the source of the discrimination you have faced more in the ignorance of people or in the Turkish identity struggling to fundamentally include your identity within it?
Ayşe, okuyorum. Günün sonunda yaşadığın ayrımcılığın sebebini daha çok insanların bilgisizliğinde mi buluyorsun? Yoksa Türklük kimliğinin siyah kimliğini kapsamak zorlanmasında mı görüyorsun?
Güzel soru.
Evet, çok güzel.
Çok güzel bir soru.
Evet.
Günün sonunda insanların bilgisizliğine ve ikisi de aslında, yani %50 diyebilirim. Çünkü böyle bir Türk kimliği yok. Siyahi bir Türk kimliği yok. Yani siyah olan bir Türk yok. Bunun dışında insanlar tabii biraz daha konuda bilinçlense belki daha davranışları daha şey olabilir, nazik olabilir. Hani günün sonunda ben işte 5 kişi tarafından durdurulmasam ne güzel Türkçe konuşuyorsunuz diye. Benim için yani %50 ikisi de.
So my answer is 50-50. She believes that both has the same amount. But at the end, she is hoping that not to be asked as how can you speak Turkish beautifully. She's just hoping be the one who was not asked by these questions. Dear Tasir,
Thank you, and this for that question. And also, we're gonna end on this last question. I think we have about a minute left. From Amber, what can we do to support the Afro-Turk community?
Afro-Türkleri ve Afro-Türk yani Afro-Türkleri biz korumak için neler yapabiliriz?
Korumak için demeyelim de onu daha çok tanımak için diyebiliriz. Yani korunmaya muhtaç bir durum olduğunu açıkçası düşünmüyorum. Etrafımızdaki insanları bu konuyla ilgili bilinçlendirebiliriz ki çok fazla üniversiteden bu konuyla alakalı tezler yazan çok fazla arkadaşımız var. Onlara da bu vesileyle teşekkür etmek isterim. Bunu çok gündeme sokup yani gündeme getirip bunu görünürlüğü daha da fazlalaştırıyorlar. Tabii bunun dışında biliyorsunuz eğitim temelden başlayan bir durum. Çocuklara tabii söylüyorum sizlere, çocuklara siyahi ırkın da var olabildiğini Türkiye'de ve bu sokakta gördüğünüzde anormal bir durum olmadığını, farklı bir şey gördüklerini sadece siyahi olarak demeyelim, farklı bir renkte işte kızıl olabilir, işte her türlü bir farklı bir şeyde, farklı bir insan yapısı gördüklerinde bunu özümsemelerini anlatmamız gerekir çocuklara. Daha sonrasında zaten bu 2-3 nesil sonra normale dönecektir.
Okay, this time I got my notes. Ayşe doesn't think that Afro-Turks needs to be protected, and in this case, she's also she's thank you for those of you who study this issue and bring this issue to the academia, because she thinks through this way the Afro-Turks will be more visible. So what can we do is to educate people. We just need to make people aware of the existence and presence of Afro-Turks, and education starts very early. So Ayşe hopes that these young girls and young boys, children, don't look at Afro-Turks and ask questions. She hopes that they already know and they already are being taught about them. Yes, that's it.
Thank you, Ayşe. Thank you for answering all of our questions, and also for letting us come to you with the questions that you hope future generations aren't going to be asking you. So I just want to thank you again for that as well. And also thank you, Bahar, for translating for us. And we're going to be moving on to talk to Rashida next. So round of applause. Thanks again. All right, next we're gonna talk to Rashida. I'll let Rashida introduce herself really quick, and then Rashida, I'll ask you a question whenever you're ready.
Okay, hello everybody. Can you hear me okay? All right. So my name's Rashida Mullings, and I am a native Washingtonian. I was born and raised in DC. I'm second generation Washington. But I've been living in Turkey for about 12 years, and I came to Turkey in a roundabout way, maybe traditional for a lot of foreign women who live in Turkey, but kind of untraditional path in a way. In college, I was a part of the Amnesty International group at my university in Arizona. And there we had many Turkish students as a part of the organization, and we did work on Turkish prisoners of conscience. And from that way, I met my future husband, now ex-husband, but also a very special person in my life still. And in my child's life, I now have a child who is Afro-Turkish as well. So I moved to Turkey in 2008 after visiting in 2007. And I moved to southwestern Turkey, which isn't usually the path of most foreigners who move to Turkey. Most foreigners move to Istanbul or Izmir or have connections through the military. But I found myself in a small town in southwestern Turkey where I thought I was the only Black person. I felt very much like the only Black person. And so I think naturally, as somebody from DC, which has a long history with the Black community in America, when it comes to civil rights, when it comes to gentrification, when it comes to, historically Black colleges and universities, I always grew up with a very strong sense of identity. And then moving to Turkey and looking at the map and seeing how close it was to Africa, I said, we have to be here. And so in doing that, my background's also in sociology, and with a focus on education, but also always with a focus on identity and identity issues. I started researching. I said, where are my people over here? And because, from what I knew about Turkey politically, and what I knew about Turkey, in pop culture or in the news, I didn't see much. And so in 2008, the subject of Afro-Turks was still kind of blooming. Like Ayşe said, in 2006, that's when when the organization was formed and they started putting themselves out there. So I did a little research and I came upon a photographer named Ahmet Polat, who had done some work with the Afro-Turkish community. I started communicating with him, as well as his wife, Shelley Lashley, who was doing makeup work, who's Afro-Caribbean, and was also living here. So I connected with them and I said, what's going on? Who's here? How can I connect with them? And I think like Zavier, who spoke before me, and then also like Ayşe, I met Mustafa Olpak. And I also, at the same time, connected with the Afro-Turkish community in my region. So the other big enclave for the Afro-Turkish community is Muğla, Dalaman, Dalyan, Köyceğiz, this region. And so we had Mustafa Olpak in Izmir, and then we had Ali Karakuş in Muğla, in Sarıgerme area, who was also trying to mobilize and educate. So some of the interviews that you'll see most popularly in Turkish media, some of them are happening in Izmir, but they're also happening in the Muğla area. And as I continued research, I also learned that it extends out into Antalya as well. And of course, we have folks in Izmir and all over the country. And so that was how I connected and tapped into the Afro-Turkish community here. I think growing up, in the family that I grew up in, I always had a very strong sense of identity. And then in meeting with the community here, of course, I was invited to Dana Bayramı, which is the calf festival, and I went there and felt so much at home and saw people who looked like my cousins and looked like, you know, my friends and like so many people growing up, and they connected to me. And I even have the very funny story of standing at a bus stop in Muğla once, and a woman turning to me and asking, saying hello. And I said hello. At that time, there weren't many Black people in the Muğla area, visibly Black people in the Muğla. And she asked me what my father's name was, and which was a shocking question to get in Turkey, because my dad's name's Willie, and why would she care? But it's also a very, it's also a very culturally, it's a cultural question. You know, who are you from? Because she had assumed, because she was also Afro-Turkish, she had assumed that I was connected to somebody in the Dalaman region. So while at once, I think in Muğla feeling isolated at times, and also at the same time connected, very much connected to people at times when meeting with the Afro-Turks, it was this weird kind of experience. And then I also wanted to figure out how I could contribute, because of course, like Zavier said before, like Zavier said before, I'm not Afro-Turkish, and so I don't want to project my experience or my needs onto the Afro-Turkish population, because of course we have a very unique experience in the States, but knowing the history of slavery, the history of erasure, and those things, I knew that there would be some overlaps. And so first it was meeting the community, and then finding out where I could provide some help. And what I saw was that there was not much visibility, and that was a need that a lot of Afro-Turks were expressing, that they don't see themselves. If you mention somebody like Esmeray, the singer, people go, oh yeah, I remember her, you know, from this time period, and oh, okay, so yeah, that was an Afro-Turkish person. Some others, for instance, like Safiye Ayla, who was one of the singers of the Ottoman court, not of the Ottoman court, of the Republican court, Atatürk's court. A lot of people know her name, but they don't know her as an Afro-Turk, because that was mostly hidden. A lot of Afro-Turks were converted to Islam or were already Muslim, and they didn't receive that same stamp of kind of minority identity that we had in the States. And so, as Ayşe was mentioning, you know, the first generation was, they experienced everything, or the first generations, and the second generation kind of tried to fit in. And now you have this generation of people more so discovering themselves. And so, you know, the natural researcher in me just kind of kept digging. And I wanted to figure out how I could contribute to identity here, or a sense of visibility here. And so I spoke with a friend of mine, a professor of art in Michigan, Michael Dixon. We talked about what we could do to a project that could contribute to increasing visibility. And we came up with the idea that the project's name is Shared Histories. The idea behind it was that there was not much modern art showing imagery of Afro-Turks, that if you went into a museum, occasionally you could see pictures of the servants in the Ottoman court and such, but there weren't a lot of modern images of Afro-Turks around, showing them as human. I think that imagery and visibility do a whole lot to increase somebody's safety and feeling of belonging and sense of identity and self-confidence and beauty. And so we did a big project and went around and interviewed people all over the Muğla region and all over Izmir to tell their stories visually. We still have a lot of information, and I've been talking with Nikki and a few others who are working on these issues about ways to bring that to life in a way that has something that people can dig into and access when it comes to making these stories part of Turkish history and Turkish pop culture, or wherever we have to do it. I'll say a few more things so we can get into the questions, but there were a few things that also were very important to me when it came to this issue. One, as a mom, I have an 11-year-old now, but when I first started getting into these issues, he was, 1-year-old or 2-year-old, and I thought, if we live in Turkey, I want him to be able to see himself reflected here, not because I'm trying to push myself, or our identity onto Turkey, but because I know that there are such identities that exist here. And then, as Zavier said, Blackness travels so strongly. And so I know how I'm received when I travel around Turkey. I know how Black people are received as we travel around the world. And a lot of that is based on American films, about music, and so for a lot of people, Blackness, especially in 2008, and even up to some years, it's either Obama or 50 Cent, right? And so that's kind of like people's perspective of who we are, and as a woman, especially, I know how dynamic we are. As Black people, I know how dynamic we are. I know that also another sense of another overlap that I found with the Afro-Turks is I know that a lot of Black Americans' contributions to the culture, to history, to science, to mathematics, to art, beyond, and I'm not here to demean rap music at all, because it's one of my favorite things in the world. I love hip hop. Hip hop is only some cases are hip hop are also shown outside of the US. But we've contributed in so many ways, and there's so much erasure of our contributions. And then to see that here as well, that's not something that sits well with me, and in my own way, it's something that I want to do more of, to bring to light. And so I'm happy that since 2008, there have been so many more people doing research, so many more people engaging in these things, and I think there's so many more collaborations come to light. For instance, one such Afro-Turkish artist, his name is Kuzgun Adar. I don't know if anybody has looked into him. Absolutely amazing man, right? And he was so influential to Turkish intellectuals of his period in the 70s and in the 60s and then 70s. And so he's somebody who fed Turkish intellectual ideas and art and Turkish art outside of Turkey, or art in Paris, and all of these things. So why don't we know these names, and then I think of some of the Black artists who were here, like the classics that we know of, James Baldwin, also Eartha Kitt was also here, right? And so they had some interesting experiences in Turkey too. So the connections are there. It's bringing those connections to light. The slave trade is also very real, and the differences and the similarities there. I've spent a lot of time in interviews with the Afro-Turkish community, listening in on the interviews, and I was just talking to another panelist about this last night. One of the strange questions that a lot of Afro-Turks get asked, when people are even aware that they exist as people, as part of this country historically, and they know about the history of the Ottoman slave trade, they say to them, aren't you happy that you were slaves in Turkey rather than in America? And it's one of those questions that, we all take a deep breath. They look at me, I look at them, and it's one of these ideas, as if that's the only thing Black people can be. We can only be slaves, we can only be former slaves, we can only be compared on those terms. And even in those terms, it's supposed to be something we're supposed to be grateful for. And that reflects a lot of conversations that you hear in the States, right? Right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, when you see people saying, okay, you guys are complaining about the police, you're complaining about visibility, you're complaining about your image, blah, blah, blah. But aren't you happy that you're here instead of in Africa right now? As if Africa also wasn't ravaged by European colonialism and all of that, you know? And so all of these ideas of who we are so hidden, and they're so masked in other people's words about who we are. And you know, just like Bob Marley said back in the day, you know, Africa unite. And so it's important for us to share each other's stories and to learn each other's stories and to connect across these stories, whether we're in the US, whether we're in the Caribbean, in South America, in Europe, in Africa, but also very much in the Middle East. You know, there's an African diaspora here in Turkey. There's both immigrant and native. There's also an African diaspora in Iran, in India, in Pakistan, right? And lots of other places. There are also branches of it in other parts of Asia. And so for me, the most important thing is making those connections and connecting people together that are working on these issues. The area of research that I want to go deeper in is invisibility and identity, and the connections of that through education. So I don't know, I kind of went all over the place. I got so excited listening to everybody talk.
Oh, thank you.
You know, even
to hear you.
even with the stuff that Ayşe was saying about, you know, when we were talking about visibility, the very was these war after Turkey nation. There were certain groups that were given minority identities and other groups that weren't. And the groups that were given identities had the backing of foreign bodies that helped to protect their identities. How protected they were in the long run is very much debatable. But I think that there is, even if you don't have the conflict that comes with some of the other groups that have minority status here, you do have the erasure, and erasure has a huge influence on a person's sense of self and on other people's understanding of the world and how complex and how much impact Africans or people of African descent have had on the country. So I'll stop there for now.
Thanks, Rashida. We have about 7 minutes left for you, but we have one question for you, and then we're going to open it up to our attendees. Our question for you, actually, sorry, before I ask this question, you seem to have mentioned a lot of artists who are working a lot that are Afro-Turk or working with Afro-Turk communities. And if you have a chance later on, if you could share that and some of the names of those artists in the chat for everyone attending, if they're wanting to know the names of the people you mentioned if they didn't get them. So
I'll add those in.
Thank you. And also, so our question for you is looking at racism in the context of white and Black in the US, it sometimes seems like a foreign and faraway concept to many Turks. So in your opinion, what's the reality of racism against Black communities here in Turkey, whether they're African diaspora or Afro-Turks here?
So I'll pop in a quick disclaimer. I love living in Turkey. I'm also not going, as a Black American, you know, for you know, a very, very long time now, we understand that part of loving where we are is criticism. And the criticism isn't to say that we aren't happy about so many other things, or we're not proud of so many other we so it's criticism as, I don't know. So I know sometimes when these issues are brought up, before I moved to Turkey, a lot of my friends said, my Turkish friends in America said, oh, there's no racism in Turkey. You're going to be absolutely fine. Don't worry, you know, don't worry. Everything's going to be fine. And of course, you know, as a Black American, I'm like, that's not possible. You know, we know it's not possible, you know, anywhere on the planet. the way things are set up these days. I also do a lot of work with African students, and some of the things that Ayşe mentioned rang true. For instance, I have a friend now who was formerly a student at our university who's African. She is Kenyan, and she would tell stories about how she would wake up in the middle of the night because there were students literally leaning over her, staring at her in her dorm room, right? It's creepy. nobody would think to wake up that way, right? So there is a natural curiosity, but sometimes that curiosity crosses the line. I've also heard lots of stories of students, not just Black students, but also Arab students who have experienced discrimination. I also accept that as an American, Black or otherwise, I'm in a place of privilege here, right? With my educational background, in the way I enter Turkish society, I have that kind of card in my hand in a way that I might not have in the US. So even keeping all of those things in mind, the fact that Black students, especially from Africa, experience some strange forms of discrimination, some interesting forms of not feeling protected, even though there's a lot of work happening, let's call it work, a lot of kind of cross-border work happening between Turkey and different African nations when it comes to mining, when it comes to people, international business and trade is very much in Africa now. We know a lot about China's role in Africa, but Turkey's also there. And if you speak to anybody, any Turks who have been in Africa, they can tell you lots of stories about that as well as others who've been in certain countries. One of my most kind of salient moments has been with the term Zenci in Turkey. And so the term Zenci, which a lot of people use to refer to Black people in general and Black people in Turkey, is a term that was used for a certain group of slaves from a certain region in Africa who were brought in by Ottoman traders. So it's a very specific term, and it refers to those people in that position of servitude. And it's not a term that really reflects everybody in Turkey. Also, it's a term that all Black people are people of African descent in Turkey, who are living here as immigrants or who are living here, who have come from other parts of the continent initially, whose ancestors came from other parts of the continent. It's also been a bit, it's messy because of American film and music, and the way the N-word is translated in a lot of cinema and music is with the term Zenci. And so there was a video of African students and Turkish students going around interviewing people on their campus about the term, about what they know about Africa, right? Not just what they know about Turkey or Europe, but how much do they really know about Africa? And it was a very cute video. It was a very funny video. Asked what people thought of that word. I ended up in a very kind of aggressive debate with people about that later. People who I thought were very open-minded, and they said they were using terms when referring to the video. Oh, if they're gonna, tell us that we have to call them a certain thing, they can go back to Africa, right? And that reminds me a lot of the things that a lot of white supremacists or people who don't consider themselves white supremacists in America say to us when we complain about discrimination or police brutality or other things. It's just like as if we don't have a right to be here. We're grateful, and all they were doing was educating. And because they were educating people about something that they took offense to instead of stopping and listening, they're being told go back to Africa. And then me arguing for their right to name themselves, for their right to educate people on the history of the word and what they prefer to be called, right? The Afro-Turks prefer to be called Afrika-kökenli Türkler or Afro-Turks. If they don't want to be called Zenci, don't call them Zenci, right? And so in enforcing that and saying that in the conversations, they start yelling at me. Well, look at you, you're a Black American, go back home and fix things there. If you're so unhappy with how people are talking to you, go home. As if I don't have a right to be here as a mother of a child of Turkish descent, as a person who's contributed taxes to this country, right? And so it gets into the same kind of weird, messy place that it gets to in America, that it gets to in Europe. And so for me, if we don't solve these issues, if we don't bring them to light, if we don't communicate about them, if we don't educate each other on them, there's going to be no solution. Whatever's happening to Black people anywhere is happening to Black people everywhere.
Thanks, Rashida. We have time for one question from the audience. And Vela says this: I have a similar experience as a Black person in Turkey. I'm an African married to a Turk. What are your views on raising a child with mixed heritage, Blackness and Turkishness?
There's somebody, I think, coming after me who may be able to speak even more in depth about this. But as a mom, and from that perspective, I think in the States, we have to prepare our Black children and our mixed children for so many things. And the lucky side of it is, as a Black mom, we already have that knowledge. I think some of those things are a little bit more challenging for white moms with mixed kids. You have to, when taking care of hair, taking care of, kind of the self-esteem stuff, they have to go through a lot more of a learning curve than we do. And I think, at least as part of the Black diaspora in the States, we're used to mixed kids being part of the community. We're used to, them, whatever challenges they're going to experience. But in Turkey in particular, what I've tried to do is bring books in my son's life from a very early age, books that talk about history, books that reinforce his sense of self-esteem. I try to talk about leadership from our communities. I try to reinforce how special he is, and I try to give him the words that he might need in Turkish and in English to talk about who he is, right? When somebody asks why your mom's skin looks like that, I try to equip him with the vocabulary to talk about it. I try not to hide the fact that he might experience discrimination. I also try not to diminish what he says when he states that he's experienced something strange. He has the experience of when he's with his dad, most people assume he's Turkish, and when he was with me, everybody assumes he's Black or African, and so who he's around changes his experience very much. But yeah, there are resources out there as a mom here, but there are a lot of tricky conversations that you have to have, and part of it is just knowing what to say in Turkish, knowing how to say it. I guess that's the most I can put together right now. You can feel free to contact me, or I can also share with the group some other resources that I've used in that. Also, educating your friends about these issues. As your friends see it, they find ways to defend you. And any of you out there, if you're friends of Black people or other people of color or minorities living in Turkey, don't be afraid to raise your voices and back them up and support them so they don't have to do it all on their own, because it gets tiring answering the same questions all the time.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Rashida. That is a great note to end on. Yes, thanks again. A round of applause.
Thank you.
And a hello to Atlas as well.
He loves you. He'll enjoy it. He might be listening actually upstairs.
Yay, okay. All right, next we're going to be, bye Rashida. Next we're going to be hearing from Zajan and Jasper. From Zajan and Jasper. They will both be introducing themselves really quick, and then we will move into asking them a few questions. I'll just go ahead and read out the first question that they can answer from us. Can you both touch on your experiences growing up biracial across two countries? how are your experiences different between the United States versus Turkey?
I'll start with my introduction first, and I just want to say thank you for everybody joining. I was really sad that Turkey did not have the BLM protest when other countries were protesting, so this discussion means a lot. My name is Ajam Yildirim. I'm half Black and half Turkish. My mother is Black American. My father is Turkish. I grew up in Turkey until I was about 15 and a half, 16 years old. And then I moved to the States for 12 years. I came back to Turkey a year ago, and I run a foundation that focuses on lessening the gap for education and giving free opportunities for English. I'm a Black woman. My mother is a Black woman. So just standing for women's rights and Black women's rights comes very natural for me. And I'm also a cousin to 2 unarmed men who were killed by the police. So I'm very sensitive, extra sensitive actually, to police brutality cases. And this is why it's very important for me to speak today. You want to introduce yourself?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Zavier Wingham. First and foremost, I want to give a birthday shout out to George Floyd. Hopefully he receives the justice that we're all seeking for him. Also, I want to say, to the panelists before us, it was great listening to you guys. Being part Turkish and part Black, hearing everything you guys had to say really means a lot. Me and my background is, I grew up in Istanbul since a baby, upwards of middle school. I actually played basketball here for one of the youth professional teams. Then I relocated to the States. I moved to Oregon, finished high school there, and then moved to Arizona, where I finished my university. At university, I actually co-founded a Black organization. It was a Black business organization that was there to develop professional skills for students and provide resources to those who wanted to be business professionals to help prepare them for the world following. Then I actually relocated back to Istanbul in 2017, so about 3 years ago. And currently I work as a corporate professional, and I'm the president of a basketball team in the 2nd division of the Turkish Basketball Federation.
I believe the first question posed to us was, how is it being biracial and our experiences in Turkey and in the States? And I can say that the common theme is that I never fit in. In Turkey, I went to international school, and me and my brother were always the only Black kid. And students only knew about Black American people through music or through sports or what they saw on television. And we had to fit every single stereotype posed to us. And even when we fit it, we could never fit it at their standard. So being 13 years old, the question they'd always ask, you'll Black if you like fried chicken. And I said, yes, I like fried chicken. And they're like, but can you cook fried chicken? But I'm only 13 years old. But then they say, okay, you have to be fast because you're a Black girl. And the boys would want to race me. And even if I beat them, they say, but you should have ran faster, you're a Black girl. So I had to fit all of those negative stereotypes, or not even negative, just stereotypes in general towards Black people. And then in the States, my mom is from Oregon, which is actually one of the whitest states in the United States. But my cousins just never saw me as being one of them because I grew up in Turkey. So because I was proper speaking, I was very articulate, I was too white. And this actually put a hole in my identity. And this is why I actually chose to go to college in Atlanta, to fill that gap. And it was actually living in Atlanta that I fully embraced as a Black woman. Nobody cared about what I was doing, how I spoke, what I ate, how I danced, because they're so used to seeing so many different forms of Black people around them and Black excellency.
For me, I would say it's similar to that. There was definitely like a identity crisis growing up. I went to a private school. It was international, and they did want to provide us tools and education on an international level so that we can learn about multiple cultures at once. With that, when I was going there, I was definitely embracing my Black side more so than my Turkish side. It's one thing that made Zavier and I unique growing up. And during that, now looking back at that time, I felt as if sometimes the experience was a little culturally insensitive. When I was in kindergarten, I still remember the songs vividly. 2 songs that really jumped out. And the key lines of one was, jump down, turn around, pick up a bale of cotton, referring to cotton pickers in the US, primarily the South. And then also the Daylight Come and Me Wanna Go Home song. And these, as a young kid, they're very catchy songs, but now looking and thinking back, how they resonate, and thinking of what the meaning was, it really opened my eyes. But I also want to mention, growing up being a boy, a lot of people did want to befriend me. I remember playing soccer in the streets, or football. I still say football. Sometimes I mix them up. But regardless of whether it's a sport or wherever I went, people did want to befriend me growing up. And going off of what Rashida mentioned about preparing her son is something that's very important. I know in the US, I can't speak for parents here in Turkey, but I know for Black parents, they always want to prepare their children to be the best that they can be and prepare them for the world. They typically don't look to shield them from the world, but to prepare them for it, because there are going to be obstacles placed in front of us. Sometimes we have to be at our best just to receive the same opportunities. So that always resonated, regardless of whether I was in the States or in Turkey.
Wow, thank you both. There's a lot to unpack there. Our next question also kind of piggybacks on what you were talking about just now, Jasper, but how were your experiences both similar and maybe different, being a biracial woman for you, Zajan, and a biracial man for you, Jasper?
I think the similarities lie in actually how we're treated. I wouldn't say that we're treated bad. Everybody knows we're a foreigner, but they can't quite figure out where we're from. Most people would actually think that we're of Arabian descent. So we get the word Arab a lot, which is actually condescending as well. But I think for the most part, we are treated well, but we're still treated lesser than fairer skinned people or people with lighter hair and lighter eyes. So while they might treat us good, I could definitely see that they'll treat other people better and before us. And in terms of how I'm treated towards, as a biracial woman and my brother, a biracial man, I do think that there is kind of this hierarchy of Black men and Black women. And typically Black men are always deemed as cool and at the top of the chain for men, and Black women are kind of at the bottom of this hierarchy. So I feel like my brother, no matter where he goes, he's tall, he's athletic, people love him. And they just think he's super popular and want to be his friend. Whereas for me, I would have to prove myself a lot more. I'm always considered not Black. When I tell people I'm Black, they're like, well, your skin is white, you're not Black, so you can't be Black. Or they'll look at my fashion sense, and if it's not European standard, they will think that you're lower class, you're distasteful. They would judge my body and say you're hippier, you have big hips, you have big thighs, a big butt. That's not cool. So while my brother was just cool for existing and being himself or whatever he wanted, I had to fit European standards and beauty ideals to even be considered popular in the same way my brother could do nothing. Do you want to talk about your experience?
Yeah, definitely. I would say she was pretty accurate in saying that there was always a sense that people did see me in a better light than her. As mentioned previously, even now at this age, people do really want to befriend me. A lot of the times they are very inquisitive on asking, am I an athlete or whatever? And I would like to bring up a quote that I read. It said, people have a variety of assumptions, but little dialogue. And that resonates here in Turkey a lot, because at times there is a language barrier and some people would naturally assume that I don't know Turkish. So if they don't speak English, they might not ask the questions they may want and naturally assume such, or they may have side conversations. And sometimes I do hear positive things, other times negative things, but the best thing I can do in those situations is let them know, hey, I speak Turkish. And when some people do realize that or hear that I do know Turkish, they're very inquisitive, always asking great questions, always wanting to know which parent is Turkish, what do you do? You're super athletic there. And it's great to know, but it's unfortunate to know that at times when seeing it from a woman's perspective, those conversations are different. And then I would say, I know men, we're masculine, we're competitive, but at times being the token Black person on a soccer pitch or a basketball court, they do automatically try and single me out to try and get the best of me. But growing up an athlete, I love that competition, like let's bang pretty much. But I would say at times there is some negative aspects of that. I know sometimes meeting people in social gatherings, some Turkish men they can be a lot more protective. I actually have a friend who used to be a basketball player here who got beat up very seriously because of overprotective and possessive individuals. There was another instance which wasn't actually in Turkey, it was in Greece. A peer of mine, someone I used to go to business school with, he actually was brutally killed in Greece following graduation from Serbians because a Serbian lady wanted to take a picture with him at a bar. And that just always resonated with me, that at times we do have to be mindful because even in our comfort zone, there may be a risk. Not saying there always is, but it's something to know. I don't want to use the word envy, that may be the case, but there aren't always good people out there. But I have experienced both the great and sometimes the negative aspects of being a biracial individual here.
And the actual bar fight that happened, it was a group of Serbians that actually killed my brother's friend. It wasn't a one-on-one fight. It's just that there's a Black man, we can't win him one-on-one, we can't single him out, let's all jump him. So you get these group of, I don't know, 8 to 10 men, and they brutally killed a single young Black college student. And in terms of just comparing, I know we're biracial, but example, Black women and Black men, for example, my father is a successful Turkish man. And when people ask us, like, where are you from? What is your mother? And we tell them that she's Black. They always think like, why is a Turkish man with a Black woman? He could do better. You know, that's kind of like the lowest on the totem pole. And the same way, often when you see Black women with a Turkish man having kids, they think like, oh, a Turkish woman with a Black man having a kid, they're like, well, she's a whore. So there's always these negative stereotypes around Black women and Black men. They're very different, but they're very present and prevalent at the same time.
All right, we have another question for you guys. These seem to be pretty heavy ones, but you touched on this a little bit in your previous 2 responses, but could you maybe go into more about this concept of Blackness in Turkey? It, in general, often seems heavily influenced by a specific experience narrated by Western media and entertainment. And do you feel like that plays out in people's perceptions and interactions with the both of you?
Definitely so. I'll say this, at any point in time, I believe today we're at the greatest point in which there's an intersection of music, apparel, and sports. And these are sort of the pillars of culture or pop culture in today's society. And when you look at all 3 aspects, they are heavily influenced by Black culture. You have, for example, Virgil Abloh, who was a skater, Black male, creative director of Louis Vuitton. Yeezy, very popular brand, seen all over the place. You have LeBron, basketball player, activist. You have Lewis Hamilton, who's dominating a predominantly European-dominated sport. You have Travis Scott. These are all well-renowned figures, not just worldwide, but here in Turkey. When you look at urban streetwear brands, Les Benjamin's the top one in Turkey, great brand. They pull a lot of their inspiration from sort of pop culture in the US or urban wear, old school hip hop or streetwear. Then you also have Turkish rap, which has evolved with the times. Back in the day, Eminem, he was like a cypher rapper, this sort of his genre of rapping. And there was Ceza here. And then you move towards more trap rap, a certain genre of rap. And now you have different artists which, you know, take this style and bring it here. And I don't see it as anything as cultural appropriation. There are some instances where it could be seen as that, but a lot of the times it's just the influence. And I think it's great, but there are negative instances where culture is predominantly appropriated and in negative contexts. Not naming any names, but you know, there's a rapper who at times uses the word Zenji a lot, uses the N-word because a few Black people have empowered him and enabled him to use it. And then also in music videos, stereotyping the Hennessy, drinking Henny, you know, with the gold teeth, Black people being athletic, prison workouts, like outdoor workouts, which have very negative connotations due to incarceration rates in the States. These are things that aren't necessarily seen or known about here, but us having our sort of global perspective and understanding and our background there, we know these and we see them. And it's unfortunate that they're not necessarily considerate of such.
I remember there was this one time I was actually in Eastern Turkey doing a school visit, and Eastern Turkey is one of the poorest regions in the country. And I was FaceTiming one of my friends, and he's Black, and the students around me immediately called him the N-word. And then there was a dark-skinned boy who was a part of the group at the school, and they started calling him the N-word. And I said, you know, don't say that, it's very rude. And they said, no, no, no, he's my brother, I can say it. But they think because rap music around the world, which is being copied in Turkey, empowers it, they think that it's okay for them to say it, and there's no educational context. They don't know about slavery, so they don't know how harmful that word is. Being lighter skinned, I don't think that a lot of people associate me to the Black race, so I don't actually those negative stereotypes upon me unless I'm at a party and people are like, hey, can you twerk? You're American, you know? But other than that, I don't really feel that. But I do think that my brother, because he's a little bit darker than I am and he's athletic, he does actually feel those stereotypes within the culture from what they see on TV. You want to touch on it or? Okay.
Okay, thank you both. Maybe our last question before we open it up to all of the attendees who have many questions for you guys as well. Listening to everything that everybody before you has been saying and you both have been saying as well, how do we start addressing the stereotypes and misconceptions that have been so prevalent in tonight's discussion?
I think it's all about education and spreading awareness. You know, use your social media platform responsibly, but also something that's very important is to not gaslight. If you hear somebody of color say that this is experience, this is what I know, don't question them and say, is that really what's going on? Did you misinterpret it? Or Black lives don't matter, all lives matter. You know, don't say this. Don't say that white privilege isn't real. Don't say that systemic racism is not a thing unless you are a person of color. But I think that it comes back to education. And I think in Turkey, that's where the main difference is that the Atlantic slave trade is not taught. And I think we have to use every opportunity to be able to educate where we can and not come out of anger, but just come out of empathy.
And to add, and it was briefly touched upon by Rashida, when it comes to a lot of primarily American films, but also just films across the world, or just depiction, when you look at African depiction, typically it's poverty or royalty. There's no in between. There's nothing discussing the middle class, a very large and growing, booming demographic in Africa. For Americans or Black Americans, we get gangbangers, gangsters, the thugs. We see musicians and rappers who are all thugs. If they're not a thug, they don't sell. And it's unfortunate to see. We don't see Black professionalism or Black excellence. Also, I can speak just for myself. Aren't used to sort of a Black professional. I wear a suit and tie 5 days out of the week. People are not used to it whatsoever. They would assume that they're more used to seeing me in, let's say, some t-shirts and some basketball shorts. But what we can do is, you know, discuss with people, keep an open mind, inform them, let them know. I'm a very talkative guy. I love to converse and let people know, hear about them, and also speak about myself. But I also think it's very important to hold influencers in the day and age of social media. There's a lot of influencers who have a very large outreach, and sometimes I don't want to use the word they need to be checked or anything, but just holding them accountable that they are their message is appropriate.
Great, thank you both. I'm gonna start getting to our attendees' questions. The first one is from Amber. Amber says, a lot of Turks deny that they're racist in Turkey. You often hear, I'm not racist, it's just ignorance. Turks are just curious. What do you have to say when you hear something like that?
Sometimes I don't think they do bring up race and racism, and maybe it's not the sense of racism as opposed to prejudice. Sometimes it could be based off not necessarily white and Black, but ethnicity. And so I do think it's prevalent. And there are some instances, you know, sometimes I do see a lot of the times Arabs or Kurdish people being spoken about negatively. And these are some things that Turks don't recognize. And I think it's important that we all should recognize our prejudice so that we can learn from it, grow from it, and understand how we can prevent it and not pass it down to the following generations.
It's important to understand that racism and colorism is actually very different. So a lot of times Turks think that they're not racist because they accept Black people, but then what about the minorities within the country? That's still racism, and it's something that they actually don't address and don't want to talk about, but having an open conversation about everything is very important.
Our next question is from Onur. Onur asks, could you tell us what your take is on the BLM movement and its political regards to anti-Black racism in Turkey?
As far as Turkey, I think one thing it's great, and I'll speak on from how it stemmed in the US or how it grew and enhanced with the Trump administration. I'll be honest, I didn't want Trump to become president, but he did. But I thought this is a great opportunity for the US to be exposed so that people can now see the problems that the US has been facing that hasn't necessarily been brought up or broadcasted outside of the US. But with that, it's now allowing us to at least discuss and bring up topics of prejudice. I'll be honest, when it comes to BLM as a general movement in Turkey, I haven't done too much research or been too involved here. However, I use my social media platform and my friends in the US to still promote and become an activist from afar. But I would say it allowed us to have uncomfortable conversations with individuals, and it birthed those conversations. Prior to BLM or the emergence of BLM, we wouldn't have had these difficult conversations, even with people such as our father, someone who's been in our life for a very long time. But yeah, but yeah, now it gives us a means to address these head on, and it's something that's very important, so that people as a community, due to globalization, we're a global community, as a whole, we can understand how to cooperate with one another and coexist.
I think the beauty of the BLM movement is that a lot of people are starting to understand the history and the pain of Black people as a whole.
Very true.
And I think that's very important, because once you know our history, then you can empathize with us. And once you have empathy, that's when it comes.
Yes.
But I guess, sorry to interrupt, I knew you were about to say something, but to also address, I know in the US, and I can't speak about it outside the US, when slavery is taught or Black American culture is taught, they skim over slavery very briefly, and they try to make it a very short lesson. And sometimes it's not even taught outside of the US. And because of that, people don't understand the issues that has transcended amongst generations, from PTSD, which is rampant in the Black community, mental health issues. People don't necessarily understand the struggle and how some of these things are passed on from generation to generation. They think because 50 years ago, there may have been laws that have changed, but with the current BLM movement, it has really resurfaced that there is a lot of inequality and inequity amongst various demographics, both in the US, but also in Turkey. And it not even pertaining directly to Black lives in Turkey, but also other demographics in Turkey.
Yeah, absolutely. Our next question is from Banu. Banu says, or asks, when you come across stereotypes, how do you handle it? Do you choose to educate people, or do you choose to remain quiet and move on?
I think it depends on the sensitivity of the stereotype that they're asking. It's really hard to know what I would do unless I know the example. But there's been times where I just entertained it and said yes or no and laughed about it. And other times I might have gotten a little offended and turned it into a history lesson. It's really hard to know until the actual stereotype is posed, because there's an array of stereotypes, and some of them are very sensitive and some of them are just harmless jokes in a sense.
You know, for like the Black guy Zaid mentioned several times, I see athleticism. Since I used to be an athlete, I would take it and be happy, but I know I have friends who weren't athletic, and for them, it's unfortunate because they don't want to be put into this sort of stereotype. And I know as a working professional and someone who really enjoys economics, geopolitics, tech, when they subject me to something as just music, apparel, and sports, they don't see the full picture of me, and they may discount the other strengths that I may have or features that I may bring to the table. So I do at times use it as a means to educate people. I think it's very important to do so.
Okay, we have time for one last question. This one is from Khadija. Khadija asks, how do we ensure that the conversation doesn't lose momentum?
I think it's all about just using your social media platform wisely, constantly share news. You know, BLM is not a trend. It's going to be here forever. You know, Black people are always going to exist. So it's always going to be an issue. There's always going to be racism, somebody that does not like a person because of their skin color. And I think that it's important to just educate yourself. And when you educate yourself, share that knowledge, use it responsibly, and you never know who you're inspiring. You know, one message online can literally spread like wildfire. So feel free to share as much as you can and educate, and just know that people are out there listening and watching, and they're sharing it too.
No, I think that is very important to keep the message going, but also choose your fights wisely, I would say. I know for me, I've seen people in positions of power in which have a lot of influence and sway, who may have sort of adverse or not good ideas or thoughts or just misconceptions. And it's very important to sometimes even tackle those, even because they may have sort of a power dynamic, and with their mindset can really cause a very huge and negative effect down the road for others, in which their decisions would impact and implicate. But also, I think it's very important to stay up to date, up to news, not only to matters regarding Black Lives Matters, because I'll be honest, when it comes to understanding the world and the plight of other people, you can see how certain things may resonate to your own people or your own history and culture. You can apply these to different examples that may be happening in your own backyard or home country. So I think not just limiting yourself to matters regarding Black lives, but just in general of the world, so that you can sort of expand your horizon on what you're thinking of, but definitely staying up to date and understanding what is going on and being informed. It's very easy to be manipulated by media nowadays. So really go out there and do your own research. I know Facebook and their algorithmic based news throwing at you, and sometimes it's just a catchy headline. Please read, do your research, take your time, and speak to people, ask questions. It's always good. People are, a lot of times people are very comforting, and they're willing to respond to you if you can make it easy for them.
I think as a Black person, we like when other people want to learn about our culture. So always ask your Black friends questions and open up the conversation. I think that's how you do keep the momentum going, is just constantly talk about it. Don't be afraid to ask questions to see if a stereotype is real or to debunk it. But the more you speak, the more you keep it alive.
Thank you both, Zajan and Jasper. Thank you.
Thank you.
We have one final question for everybody. This is from Tara, who's a high schooler, and I just wanted to throw this out there in closing. And if you guys, Zajan, Jasper, Zavier, Rashida, or Ayşe, feel like responding, please do. Or if you have any final thoughts you'd like to throw in. Tara asks, how do you think we can change the perceptions of Black people in Turkey, especially with younger generations like herself? Thank you all. If anyone wants to take the floor, please.
I'll say one thing. One huge thing I know for me growing up, whether it was in Turkey or in the States, is representation and finding someone they can identify with or come to and discuss. Growing up, there was a few basketball players who took that mentor, that guidance role. Unfortunately, there's not too many Afro-Turks or African Americans that you see in Turkish spotlight. And I think if there was a little bit more representation or sort of a community or sort of a platform that would allow people to understand more, it could really push forth the representation of Blacks across the globe in Turkey.
It's really hard to actually answer that question. How do you change your representation? Because I think a lot of the representation comes from the entertainment. So movies, TV shows, music. I think that if Digiturk, for example, were bringing different shows and how they portray Black actors at the forefront, that would be something. But I feel like that's something that it's hard to do person to person in Turkey, besides just using your social media platform or having conversations. But I think bigger companies in Turkey actually have to take it upon themselves to change the representation of the narrative of a Black person coming to the eyes of Turkish people.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback on them. They're talking about representation and visibility, and I think it's what we've all been talking about throughout this, right? Visibility in history books, visibility in education, visibility publicly. I think, again, because a lot of people don't consider people of African descent as being Turkish, right? A lot of times they're in films and in things, they're always portrayed as an other, as being, rather than being part. Or if you can pass, right? We have this term passing. If you can pass, then they just take this person as a dark-skinned Turkish person instead of making an attempt to talk about their identity. And I think, generation-wise, this is kind of outside of my son's generation or Zaydan and Jasper's generation, right? For a lot of older generations with Afro-Turks, people have mixed so far down the line and kind of erased their own visibility in a way in order to be accepted by society. And so we really have no idea about the numbers because people are so mixed and they have no idea they have African ancestry. Or there are people who know they have African ancestry who don't look like they have African ancestry, so people assume they aren't. But I think, like they said, the more we talk about it, the more we get things out into the media, the more we share, the easier it will be for everyone.
And just to piggyback one last time, I think they take time. It takes a new generation to come through. With social media, the platform and the ability to reach out to a lot more people has provided means for a lot easier interconnectivity. And with that being said, when mentioning representation, unfortunately, someone like Kuzgun Acar, he wasn't someone who could really promote his name, but now there, for example, an old soccer player from Beşiktaş, Pascal Numa, Black African male, he has a very ultra popular radio talk show host. He's fluent in Turkish. It's very popular now for basketball sort of commentary. There's an individual called Elaine Digbo. He used to be a basketball player, professional here in Turkey. He speaks fluent Turkish, and you see him now on sort of sports commentating shows. So I think over time, there will be slow changes, but again, it takes time and none of these things will happen rapidly.
And just to go back to what my brother was saying, he was mentioning a lot of athletes, and we have to not put Black people as only athletes or entertainers. We need to see business professionals and other jobs in the Turkish community. But I think that as Turkey continues to develop and more globalization comes, you're going to get more people like Rashida coming to work in Turkey, and that representation is going to spread slowly.
Thank you all so much. I also want to point to the chat where Zavier has actually shared a few links during our talk today that seem really interesting. One is a talk from Nikki, who was working about Olpak's memoirs. She was invited, but she wasn't able to connect into this conference, but she has a talk coming up on October 30th. And Zavier, you also shared something from Ayşe what is this? Vocabularies of Invisibility is remaking the Afro-Turk identities. And another link from BNet, which is a great news source. Is there really no anti-Black racism in Turkey? That's the links that Zavier shared. And we'll include these in an email that we'll send out to all of you attendees maybe later tonight or so. And I just want to give you guys a round of applause again for joining, and also, yeah.
Thank you. Can I poke in just briefly? We've been talking about Nikki, the professor who is working on the translation of Mustafa Alba's book, and she just wrote me. She's on the call now. She said her class just she's on the call with her entire classroom right now in Kentucky. So I don't know. I give it to you guys if I don't know if Nikki wants to say anything, or how, if you want to ask any questions to Nikki. I guess she could. I don't know how we would do that, but just so you know, she's here.
We have a little time. We
Yeah,
can
let's message her.
I don't know how.
We
need to make her a co-host.
We have to enable her mic, but in the meantime, while we figure out how to get Nikki available, hopefully she wants to say something. I have a quick announcement about an announcement that I have been given to read to you guys about an upcoming book club that we're opening that Yabangee and Istanbul&I are co-hosting. So this is the update. We're happy to announce that the Istanbul chapter of Because We've Read is going to be opening here in Istanbul in collaboration with Istanbul&I and Yabangee. Because We've Read is a global book club that was started by Hoda Katabi. I don't know when. This year, 2018, that's right, 2018. And now that the Istanbul chapter is starting, we'll follow up this discussion with a talk in 2 weeks. It'll be on October 28th from 7 to 9 p.m. And we'll start with the first essay of James Baldwin's The Fire next time. The essay is called My Dungeon Shook. And if you want to attend, you just need to read the essay before October 28th. And there's a free PDF of the book, which includes this essay and one more on becausewe'veread.com. We'll provide that information and link to everybody who RSVP'd tonight. And we'll be including this in an email, and also how you can sign up for the first meeting of Because You've Read. And I'll also provide a URL for how you can sign up for the book club if you want to keep attending meetings. So thank you guys again for attending. And did we get Nikki? Oh, I guess.
It's too hard.
We can. Yeah.
We can send information or something for how to reach out to her or connect to her. Through
I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Ah, there she is.
Yay! Everybody say hello! Yay! You're in Turkey. I don't know what I'm doing.
Okay.
Everybody repeat after me. Repeat this phrase. İyi akşamlar. Okay. Say it loud for everybody. İyi akşamlar. Merhaba. Merhaba. From Turkey. Am I still there? Oh, see, they're waving to you. They're waving. Am I muted? I am not muted. Am I not muted?
You're not muted.
No, I'm not muted. Okay, so.
You're good.
So it's so nice to see everybody. Everybody says hello. This is my seminar in oral history and civil rights. We are socially distanced, as you can see. See? Anybody want to say anything? Want to say hello?
Thank you guys for joining.
Let's give one
all the way from.
Evet. Teşekkürler. Okay.
Teşekkür ederiz. I don't know if she can hear us, but okay, Nikki, thank you for sharing us with your class, and everybody else who attended, who dropped in and out. We just want to thank you again for joining this discussion, and we hope that it has brought you guys further discussion, that maybe you'll reach out to the panelists here or find your own friends and keep talking. And also Yabangee and Istanbul&I will be getting together to talk more. Actually, we definitely will be with our book club. So we hope to see you guys on October 28th, either in person or online, probably online. Again, have a great night and we'll be in touch. Bye.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
İyi akşamlar herkese.
İyi akşamlar.
İyi geceler.
Teşekkürler.
Sana da.